You don't want to be close to somebody that you think is disgusting, or you think is below you, or you think isn't good enough, or you think is an idiot. I just want to get away from those kind of people.
Well, and that's one of the reasons they say it's the single greatest predictor of divorce. It's really scary. And what ends up happening if I give into habitual contemptuousness
Contemptuousness.
Yes, thank you. If I'm continually being that way, I become blind to my own actions because I'm fooled into believing that I am superior to you. And that belief, superiority, justifies my actions. So I'm continually justifying while I'm continually doing incredible damage to the future and to the current state of our relationship.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan. We're so glad that you're here.
Yes, it's always good to hang out with you.
Yeah, and one of our absolute favorite parts of the podcast is hearing from you and what makes you smile about your husband or wife. And you can share your thoughts simply emailing us, Tara, T-A-R-A, at behindoursmiles.com.
And today we're hearing from Megan, and she is talking about her husband, Brian. And she says, when I think about my husband, I always smile, remembering our wedding and how every single guest told me he loves you so much because of his actions at the ceremony. He continues to show me every day for 18 years now, and it makes me smile. And I really did smile when I heard that because it reminded me a little bit of our wedding. And it reminds me of weddings that we've gone to where you look at the way the groom is looking at the bride or the way the bride's looking at the groom, you go, wow, he really loves her. Like, and what they do, it encompasses the whole feeling. And that it was so powerful that people are telling her, your husband loves you so much. Like, that is such a beautiful way to begin a marriage. And it sounds like he kept going for 18 more years.
When you love someone, or when someone loves you, rather, you can see it on their face. It's written on their face.
It kind of spills out.
We still, to this day, there's a look that you have, and it right away tells me everything I need to know.
But this episode is more about when we don't have that look. So we're going to take a different look, right? We're going to take a sharp 180 instead of the look that's like, man, he loves you so much. Sometimes we have actions and looks and behavior that says, I don't like you at all.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Gotmans. They have what's called the 4 Horsemen, and basically they look at 4 things that can absolutely destroy your marriage relationship.
Unhealthy conflict patterns, mostly from conflict patterns. So we started with criticism, and technically this is the second horseman is contempt, but we kind of switched it around because I like defensiveness. They got to go hand in hand, like what leads to what and what goes to what. So they do say that if you have an atmosphere of criticism in your relationship and in your conflict, resolution, if left untethered or unhindered, it will turn into contempt. And so that's our third horseman of dangerous in your marriage is contempt.
And they actually refer to it as sulfuric acid of love.
Yeah, that's a great word picture.
Yeah, it just kind of eats through everything, right?
It will destroy it in a heartbeat. And we've, all experienced that in some place in different levels. But again, the point of this episode right now is to call attention to these things that we know can be so destructive to us as individuals and to our relationship.
So we talk about contempt. What exactly is contempt?
Yeah, because you kind of know it when you feel it.
And we've seen all the TV shows about being in contempt of court, that kind of stuff. But what really is contempt?
Yeah. Well, from what the Gottmans describe and understanding the definition, it's primarily fueled by long, simmering negative thoughts about your partner or your spouse, which comes from a place of moral superiority. So I think those are the 2 main components of contempt. You have not just a negative thought, because we can all have a negative thought. We probably have a lot of them, but this idea that they've been simmering for a long time, and it comes from a place of, I am better than you. And those are both, that's a toxic combination of negative thoughts and I'm better than you. And that pretty much leads to contemptuous behavior and attitudes.
So maybe to really simplify it, it's looking down on your spouse as if they were worthless or being despised, right? see them as lesser.
Less than. And we can struggle with this at different levels, but when contempt is running rampant, we're talking about this idea that when it's just running wild, that just, again, I like even talking about it because you're like, oh man, if I think those kind of negative thoughts about my spouse, let them simmer. And I basically am telling them who they are as a person is wrong. And we talked about this a bit during criticism. They're insignificant. And once I'm saying those words, you're going, oh, how would we begin to solve a problem from that starting point?
Yeah, and I'm not sure we would ever define it. Like when there is contempt in our marriage, I wouldn't say I think you're insignificant, but it's the way that I'm treating you and the way that I'm talking to you and the way that everything is set up. I'm looking down on you and significance is one of the harder things as humans to overcome anyway. We can feel insignificant just by being people. So then when you're in a relationship with the person closest to you and they're talking to you or treating you in a way that makes you feel insignificant, then that can be
those are
really
like
hard.
Soul wounds.
Yeah.
And I know for Joe, for you grew up, you struggle with that sense of significance because of the way you grew up, you were raised and treated as a child. So you probably were exposed to contempt at a very young age. Would you say you were an atmosphere of feeling that way? I know you didn't call it contempt when you're 5 or 6,
right.
But how did that feel or look like for you?
Oh, it felt horrible. It makes you feel worthless. And I think that there are times when all of us are capable of this, right? When we think our children should be at a different level than they are, they do something that surprises us where we thought they were more mature than that, or whatever the situation is. That's kind of how I felt growing up a lot, is that I was looked down on, that I was an inconvenience, that I caused problems. I shouldn't be in the way. And it really led me to feeling insignificant and worthless.
So some of these can transfer to our marriage, but let's kind of think about some of those phrases. There's a lot of phrases that can signify contempt. So we can't just pick one, because when you are in that place in your brain, you can come up with some pretty nasty things to say. But we've mentioned, like, okay, you're an idiot. What's wrong with you? How could you do that? What would you say, like things that you heard that told you that you were insignificant?
You're worthless. You're not worth this. You are a moron. You are an idiot, just like you said. And of course, there were a lot worse things said along those lines, but it wasn't the thing you did was idiotic or the thing you did was wrong. It was you are the problem. You are the one that's worthless. And that's where I think it becomes so dangerous, because and many times even within our marriage, I have communicated that without even realizing that's what I'm communicating.
And how about ridicule?
Yeah, another big one. Yeah.
And that's a tough place to experience ridicule. So even though you grew up in a flat out abusive home and again, wrong things happening, it's not to say that, again, we're not vulnerable to also exhibiting those same things in our marriage. Our marriage, I know there's been times where contemptuous feelings and attitudes have creeped in, and it's like a hard thing to kind of go, yeah, I've been there. I've talked down to my husband and basically said, well, you're the idiot. Like, you're the one, or why didn't you know that? Or you should have known better. Or like, again, I just really facing all of those. And I think for me, the first step was like going, hey, I think I'm having long simmering negative feelings. You kind of take those negative feelings that you're having and they're long simmering. And instead of kind of dealing with this and saying, here's my feelings and here's maybe where there is legitimate hurt, and just kind of taking all of it and throwing it on you and saying, you're the problem. I know that I got caught into that kind of loop.
And I think it's different what leads to the loop. And for me, when I found myself in a season of contempt, if you will, it started with my thought processes, and I wasn't even aware of what was happening. My words hadn't caught up yet. So my words were coming out fine, but I was thinking, how dare you, or how could you do that? Or what's wrong with you? Those kinds of thoughts. And I think back to what you were saying about the loop, I could definitely sniff that out. I could recognize that something wasn't right, and then I didn't respond right.
So for a long time,
and it becomes
contempt doesn't breed grace.
Right, because and then you talked about the loop or the cycle, You're feeling contempt and then I'm responding, but I'm adding to your ability to feel the contempt. So in other words, to justify what you're feeling, I'm adding to it with my response.
It really does pile on each other, because if I'm already upset with you, or not upset, we'll say those long simmering negative feelings, like, okay, I'm already sort of thinking you do all this stuff wrong and you missed the boat here and you're the problem. And then if you're sniffing that out and you call me on it, right? The defensiveness kicks in, whatever, but you call me on a way that's also contemptuous, then I go, see, you're the mean one. And it like justifies my opinion of you because you reacted wrong. So I don't even know who started the contempt.
And why is it as humans, that's how we tend to react? Like, I just have to one up you somehow, right? If you're being contemptuous toward me, why is it that I automatically default into being contemptuous toward you?
So contempt
such
really
a
does,
crazy thing.
Like you said, Joe, start as a mind game. It starts in the heart. It kind of reminds me of when Jesus shared the Sermon on the Mount, like whether you have lust in your heart, it's the same thing. Whether you have hatred in your heart versus murder, it all starts in the same thing. So I think it starts in our heart with how we think about our spouse and how we are thinking of them as a person. Are they worthy of value? Are they on the same plane as us? Are they our equal, or are we morally superior to them? And I think once you start telling those lies to yourself, saying, I am morally superior to my spouse, I don't make the mistakes he does, I don't have the moral failings he does, I am. And I think for me, that loop began because, Joe, you did struggle with a lot of things that I have never struggled with. I could get on my very moral high horse and say, I have never said, done, thought, struggle with those things that you're struggling with. And so that's where the pride obviously is feeling contempt as well, to say, well, I don't struggle with that. And so I'm over here, I'm going to tell you that you're worthless, so not realizing my own response. Does that make sense?
Right, because in full disclosure, you never said to me, Joe, you're worthless. You sometimes, it was just hard for you to relate or to understand what I was experiencing. And I do think when one spouse is in the midst of struggle, it is easy to look and go, well, at least I'm not like that, right? At least I'm not struggling in that way, or at least I don't struggle like that. And we not only do that in our marriages, that happens, that can happen anywhere.
Worldwide.
That's just human nature. But
with the heart issue, so it's in your heart. And like you said, you can sniff it out. You know, if I'm a little bit like whatever. And I think the biggest picture of this we have is contempt is the eye roll. And we all know how to roll our eyes, and we all know exactly when to roll our eyes. And we all know how it feels when someone's rolling your eyes at you. Yeah. And it's such a simple, small piece of body language, but we know what it signifies. We know exactly what the message is without even putting the words in. And there's times I've caught myself rolling my eyes. And the minute I catch myself doing it, I'm like, why am I rolling my eyes at him right now? Like, that's a heart, that's a me problem. I need to find a better way to communicate what it is I'm feeling inside. Obviously, I'm feeling something and I'm feeling something negative, but the eye roll does not move us in the direction of solving our problem.
No, it doesn't move us toward closeness,
Because I know, I mean, you've seen me roll my eyes at you either very, very obviously or very, very subtly. Like,
well, I think where it really shows up, and because we're close, you can't pull those things over on me. So I'm like, so I may ask you literally, why are you rolling your eyes? Or you may ask me something similar if you notice it too. But where I really noticed it was in your need to correct and not offer grace. So if I said there were 12 people at the party and there were only 10, or you thought there were only 10 or you thought there were 15, there was a correction instead of offering grace in that.
A correction is definitely a key component of contempt. And the reason is because, again, I know better and I know better and I know better. And so it's like, so it's not the correction itself that's a problem per se. You know, there are times we correct each other. We talked about this in criticism, you know, like you missed your exit. So like there's a correction that comes from love and support. And there's a correction from, let me push you down so I can be right. And that's fueled by contempt. That's still, I'm morally superior to you. And I feel those thoughts come in my head too, going, why is he getting it wrong again? Why is he saying it wrong again? But again, it's not the thing. It's my attitudes towards you that fuels contempt, not what you say or what you do or what you don't say or what you don't do.
Yeah.
So that's where I know I have to struggle with saying it's a heart process first. Because if I'm pushing you down and I'm saying I'm better than you in any area, that's not love, that's not grace, and that's going to destroy you and us.
Yeah, and I think other ways that it shows up. So eye rolling is one of the ways, but disrespect is another one. Mocking, sarcastic, sarcasm is a big one, right? Being right out mean. You talked about ridiculing earlier and name calling. We haven't struggled with all of these, but at the end of the day, we've struggled with these, and contempt is still contempt.
Well, and mocking is a big one. I don't think anybody can really get into any kind of argument without saying, well, you're always like, why don't we do this? And well, you're all like, oh, well, I just wanted to, like, you always have to throw that in there. It's like a cardinal rule. Like, you first have to tell the other person, this is how you sound to me, and I'm going to make you sound ridiculous.
Yes.
Right? Joe, why are you always like, well, I wanted to go with this. And then we both have these really weird sounding voices when we throw the mocking at. And even though you're saying, no, I'm giving you a lesson so you can know how you sound, it never received. It never had you tell me how I sound to you and go, wow, I sound that way, do I? Like, I'm like, I don't say it that way. That's not at all what I say.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're never like, wow, I just learned something. Thank you so much. This is going to be life-changing. No, what ends up happening is I don't respond with grace or vice versa. And then it ends up just escalating. I know
we do it to make a point. But even though like that slips in and later on we apologize, mocking is mocking, sarcasm is sarcasm, being mean is being mean. We don't have to call it by any other name except it's bad. It's contempt. It's sinful. It breaks the heart of God, and it breaks the heart of our spouse when we treat other people as if they are insignificant, as if they are idiots. And again, even though I think with contempt, I wouldn't say it's run rampant through our marriage, but I think the times that it's taken a few little, runs around the block, I can say, yeah, it's dangerous. I have to guard against that. Once the thought comes in my head that says, I'm morally superior to Joe, like I'm just a better person. Like there's no way we can begin to move together as a couple if we're not saying, hey, we're both equal, than me saying I'm better than you.
Right. And I think we could list hundreds of examples of how you're better than me at certain things.
Yes,
and vice
if I wanted
versa.
to make a list, there are areas I'm better than you.
But and vice versa, yes. I hope. Maybe, not in a contempt way, but that's what makes us special in our marriage. That's what makes our marriage so strong, is that you do have strengths where I have weaknesses and vice versa. But when we start capitalizing on those things to push each other down, that's when
I'm better than you as a person. As a person, I'm just more holy and righteous and on the right path.
But why, as humans, is that where we go? So like I pull a dirty dish out of the cabinet. Yeah. Why is my default position like, you're a terrible person? Well, why are you not putting dirty dishes away?
Everybody knows.
Right.
Everybody knows how to do it. How could you not know this? Yeah. And again, it's just like, I'm an idiot. I really am an idiot. Like, not even just I struggle or I fail. We go to the extremes and say, I'm an idiot. So I think that's something that I've had to guard against, to say when I feel it. And I think, Joe, you've grown in your ability to handle these things, which is the idea of like, how do we graciously deal with it? And I go, for you, sometimes you're good at calling me out on something in a gracious way, rather than, fire with fire, contempt with contempt. Like, hey, you're talking down to me, or don't treat me like I'm an idiot. And I think that's fair to say, like, I don't want to be treated this way. Please be nice to me. You're being mean. And I don't want to be treated mean. And I think that's a hard place. I okay that with you, but I think you're better than me.
I think it's a whole nother podcast, this idea of sometimes I perceive things that aren't accurate either.
Yes.
So sometimes I perceive that you're talking down to me when you're really not. And I don't think that's fair either. So then we have to talk that through, because you can share your heart intent. But I think in a moment, if I'm having a conversation with you and you say to me, it feels like you're mocking me. Are you mocking me? Then I need to evaluate my heart in that moment and be honest and say, yeah, you know what? I was mocking you. Yeah. Or no, that wasn't my intent. And that's the only way, because if I am talking to you with contempt and you just absorb that, that's going to hurt our closeness.
Well, like what it said about from the Gotmman, it says it's virtually impossible to resolve a problem when your partner's getting the message that you're disgusted with them and that you're condescending and acting as their superior. So once you establish that in your relationship, say, by the way, I'm superior. By the way, I'm disgusted with you, and I'm going to talk down to you. Your ability to solve a problem with that person is pretty much gone. you can't problem solve. You can't fix whatever the problem was. If you were negative thinking about something, whatever it is that promoted the negative thinking, the actual issue at hand, once you get to that place of contempt, there's no solving that problem. And and intimacy, that's gone, because you don't want to be close to somebody that you think is disgusting, or you think is below you, or you think isn't good enough, or you think is an idiot. I just want to get away from those kind of people.
Well, and that's one of the reasons they say it's the single greatest predictor of divorce. It's really scary. And what ends up happening if I give into habitual contemptuousness
contemptuousness.
Yes, thank you. If I'm continually being that way, I become blind to my own actions. Because I'm fooled into believing that I am superior to you. And that belief, superiority, justifies my actions. So I'm continually justifying while I'm continually doing incredible damage to the future and to the current state of our relationship.
No, that's amazing. I mean, it's not amazing. It's like literally what humans do.
But it's amazing that you pointed that out, because I think that in those seasons when we were contempt or had contempt toward each other, what is the word? You didn't just roll your eyes, did you?
Yeah, you don't even know that. How do you not know how to pronounce that?
But in those seasons, I do think that I could see where that was beginning to happen, where there's a blindness that starts to set in.
Yeah, without the grace of God in our lives and having a relationship with God, that blindness is blinding to your own. It's one of those things that everyone else can see it except the person there. That because you're justifying yourself, when you get in a state of justification, going, well, of course I'm treating him this way. I have to because I'm better and this, and it's for this. And you just build up this whole wall of lies of why your behavior is justified, even though you are crushing somebody at the soul level. You know what I mean? It becomes not just an inconvenience or like that bothered me. It's crushing someone's sense of self. And when I was able to read about that and learn about that, it's sobering, because you're going, oh, I don't want to be that kind of person. But yet it slips in. It slips in through that little tiny voice just says, but you're better than him and you wouldn't make that mistake. And you let that simmer and grow, and suddenly you're in a full out contemptuous relationship.
Well, on pride, right? That's really where that tends to take off. In the research that was shared about this whole subject, it was interesting because it showed that couples that are contemptuous. See, I got it right that time. Of each other are more likely to suffer from infectious illnesses.
It literally wears down your immune system. And it was kind of the reverse too. As you were in like happy, intimate relationships that were mutually edifying, like there was a boost in the immune system to fight off different things. It's like, it's just like it's a poison to your soul, and it can be a poison to your body. And again, I'm sure everybody knows somebody whose contempt destroyed their life, right? Because again, at some point, Joe, it extends beyond you, or extends beyond, I could have contempt for my kids, contempt for my coworkers. And suddenly everybody in the world is now below me, and everybody is insignificant, and and that's a miserable life to live in the end. So it's like, no, I don't want to live that way. God, protect me from any level of contemptuousness coming into my heart.
So how, thinking and jumping off on what you just said, what is the antidote? How do we keep it from getting into our marriages? And when it shows up, because it's going to show up in all relationships, how do we quickly recognize it and keep it from causing a lot of damage?
Well, first of all, know it slips in. And that's, often how the enemy works in our lives when he wants to grab hold of our attitude. Is just that one small lie and that one thing. So I think to recognize, saying, hey, where am I looking down on my spouse? So I think, because that starts the thought before it even slips out to behavior. But the Gotmans, their major go-to antidote is building a culture of appreciation and fondness and admiration, which is the reverse, meaning instead of figuring out how you're better, to go, how are there ways that I can lift up my spouse? Like, what about him do I love? And how can I say, hey, I appreciate these things about him? And it's weird because once you get a negative mindset on someone and you're sure that they're below you, you find all the reasons in the world to keep collecting that bucket. Yeah. If you're looking for it, you will find it, versus being able to say, hey, let me look at how can I show appreciation?
It reminds me of, anything that you have in your life, like let's say our car. If I went out to my car every day and found things to complain about and I didn't like it and just kept complaining about it, eventually I'm going to have a new car, right? Eventually I'm just going to get rid of it. I'm going to buy a new one. But if I go out every day and I'm grateful that I have that car, I'm thankful that God blessed me with it, then I tend to look at it very differently, and the lifespan of that car probably is going to be different as a result.
Right. I think so in that way you're saying contempt is destructive both in the person pushing out the contempt.
Yeah.
It destroys you because you suddenly go, I can't stand this person. And you can't handle it. And the person receiving the contempt, also that's not livable because they're going, I am being told I'm worthless. So being able to swap that, and obviously in some relationships, it's both. But I like the way the Gotmans talked about a culture of appreciation. So it's not a one-day fix kind of thing. It said, fondness and admiration aren't built overnight. But if you intentionally work to do small, positive things for your partner every day, then you create that system. Once you've created it, it will act as a consistent bulwark against contempt. So now there's some hope. This idea of going, those little things we do, and we talk about this in the podcast all the time, but those small little acts of love and kindness and appreciation over time build a protection. Because again, you're not assuming the worst about your spouse. You're not always going, well, you're the idiot and I'm the morally superior one and you're the idiot. You're just little by little finding ways to be appreciative and be fond of your husband or wife.
Isn't it great when like biblical principles show up? Like having a heart of gratitude really does.
Thinking about the good things that are good and holy and beautiful. And even in light of that contempt, like, okay, there are times that you have contempt because those negative feelings are there and those might be legit. Like there might be some serious hurts in your heart and your relationship, but contempt doesn't solve those problems. So it's like, okay, the second issue is if you have long simmering negative thoughts about your spouse, to bring those out in a healthy way and to say, okay, I've got to start being honest with my feelings, where I'm really struggling inside, what do I need help with? And then fixing those things rather than just throwing contempt on it to make yourself feel better for a moment.
Yeah. And I think also it's not just, it starts with ourselves. So it starts with me getting before God or really thinking that through and understanding why am I feeling the way I'm feeling. But I think it also has to lead to a conversation with you. And so we have to create margin because that's not always easy to do. If I'm feeling like my feelings are hurt, there's a vulnerable state that I'm in. So it really does take creating margin, and it feels awkward at first and it can feel a little weird and strange, but creating that environment by which we can freely share and then also appreciate that culture of appreciation really does help keep that away. And then when it does enter, that's a way to kind of root it out pretty quickly.
Well, I think it goes back to preventing contempt versus when you have it. Preventing is that culture of admiration. And then again, finding healthy ways to express negative feelings before they turn into contempt. Because I think that's where I have felt myself going, I never quite dealt with like, okay, this really bothers me and I don't know how to talk about it. And so I'm just going to kind of hold it in. And then in the end, it just comes out on you and you're the problem. So again, this is something you have to 100% watch for. But I think when it comes to the person who is contemptuous, the first solution also is just plain old repentance. If you have had that kind of mean behavior of insult, mocking, disrespect, there's no way to whitewash that. Like, it's ugly and needs to be repented of. And you just got to turn it over to God and say, my heart is ugly and I need to be forgiven and clean and start fresh. So it's like, you can't skip that step of flat out repentance if you've had a contemptuous attitude toward the people in your life.
You make that sound so easy.
I'm preaching to myself. Like, there's just...
No, but it is true. And it's not just repentance.
Can't be yada, yada, yada. You know,
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
you're going to like face it. And I think in your relationship too, I am sorry for having a contemptuous attitude toward you. I'm sorry for saying mean words. I'm sorry for disrespecting you. I'm sorry. Like, you got to get it all out. Otherwise, there's more simmering negative feelings for never apologizing for those things.
Right. Because once I say I'm sorry and I'm specific in my apology, will you forgive me? So I repent before God and you and make that as right as I can in the moment. Right. Then we can start to share about how we got there. Right. Then we can start. Well, because I think if you apologize to me, this is exactly how a conversation has gone. Joe, I'm really sorry about the eye roll or whatever. I'm really sorry about correcting you in that. It wasn't that important. then I'm able to say, and then you say, will you forgive me? I say, I forgive you. Then I'm willing, I'm able rather to follow up with a question to say, what led you to start to feel that way? Because I contributed to that in some way, and maybe I'm innocent in that, but it's important for us to understand how we got there to prevent ourselves from getting there in the future. And by the way, I said, maybe I'm innocent. I don't know that there's ever been a time that I've been innocent. So I'm just saying that there could be that situation, but in our circumstances, most of the time, there is something that I've done or am doing that is creating, and it's a misstep maybe along the way where I could say, you know what, Tara, I can correct that. The next time I share that story, I thought there were a dozen people. There really weren't. I am really sorry. The next time I share that story, I will be more accurate. Yeah.
But when we're coming from a place of, again, you feel like you were just this small, the motivation to do better is never there. So to be able to, spur each other on to love and good works. How do I encourage you to do better? If I want you to be a better husband, being contemptuous towards you will not be the ticket out of there. It'll be the ticket out for both of us. So exciting topic today.
Yeah. And that, back to real quick, when that starts to show up, there is a painful response. Like it is painful when I notice you because we're close. And so it's hurtful. If we don't deal with it in that part of the relationship, then we both start to become numb, and then it begins to run rampant. So I love that God gave us those ideas of warning signs, and we can, no matter how rampant it's been, if both parties are willing, we can work it back. We can find healing through repentance and a willingness to shift and change. But there's no greater feeling in the world of having that closeness reestablished and knowing that we are both for each other.
We're equals.
Yes.
And not one above the other. And again, it's human nature. It's the sin of pride, which has been with us since the beginning. But we have to talk about it because it shows up. And the sooner you can fix it, the sooner you can note it, the easier it is to tackle.
And no matter how much we've been married, almost 27 years? No matter how much we've learned, no matter how great a marriage looks, it still shows up. It still is there, and it's things that have to be dealt with. So thank you so much for joining us today. We love hanging out with you. We love hearing from you. Tara, T-A-R-A, at BehindOurSmiles.com. If you ever want to drop us a line, your rating and reviews are huge. Thank you for your 5-star rating. And Tara, we've got the fourth and final Horsemen.
Next week, Stonewalling. There we go.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.